Afternoon, Vice President.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is a wonderful, wonderful turnout. My name is Carlos Diaz. I'm the founding director of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. Thank you, sir. Established by the legislature and the governor of the great state of Florida, the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom is a world-class, independent, nonpartisan think tank that aims to inform, influence, and inspire current and future leaders to develop and implement innovative, meaningful, and effective policies to advance economic and individual freedom and human prosperity in the US and around the world. Many of you know, I'm sure, Adam Smith for his work as an economist, mostly for The Wealth of Nations, his best-known book. But he was also a great moral philosopher, someone who wrote about the importance of having a politics and society based on mutual respect. And that is exactly what we want to emulate here at the center. We want to be a convening place where important decision makers come to discuss important issues and share with our students their experiences and their different points of view. The Vice President has been incredibly generous and kind to join us today, and in a few minutes we're going to engage in a conversation with him. I imagine that many of you agree with his policy views, with some of you with a lot of those policy views, and that others might disagree with him, perhaps on an equal number of issues. However, I ask that you take the time to listen to him, and whether you agree with him or not, that we afford him the respect that he deserves as a public servant who has served his country so honorably for more than 20 years. I see many familiar faces in the crowd, so I don't want to call on every one of them because there are too many, but I do want to highlight one person, a couple of people who are here. A legend in our community, Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen. Thank you. And her husband, Dexter Lehtinen. And then, I don't want to cold call, but I will be calling on you in a few minutes to see if you can say something about the Vice President that we don't know. You served in Congress with him. He was in Congress for 12 years, and you served with him for all those 12 years. So, the former President of the Republic of Chile, President Frey, thank you. The former Vice President of the Republic of Colombia, Francisco Santos. Former US Ambassador to Uruguay, Martin Silverstein. We have many other elected officials here. We have our Provost, our Senior Vice President for Research, and of course we have the former Second Lady of the United States, Karen Pence. Thank you. And now, it is my pleasure to welcome the 48th Vice President of the United States, Michael Richard Pence. Mr. Vice President. All right. So I want to begin the conversation already breaking protocol. When we have somebody of your stature, I think protocol is to do a long and lengthy introduction that does justice to your extensive career as a public servant. I could spend the whole hour talking about your 12 years in the US Congress, your 4 years as the 50th governor of the great state of Indiana, or your 4 years a heartbeat away from the presidency. But I won't do that. Instead, I want to introduce you the way that you like to be introduced. A Christian, a conservative, and a Republican, in that order. So here's a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican, in that order. And so rather than spend more time on the introduction, I want to get right into the conversation. And I want to talk a lot about you as a man as well, as a father, as a husband. We're going to talk about economic freedom, and we're going to talk a lot about the book, but I want our students to get to know you personally as a public servant, and again, as a man, a husband, and a grandfather as well. And so let's begin. I read your book with great care, and I highly recommend it. The Vice President will be signing books right after this event, upstairs on the 3rd floor. Let me begin with a quote from your book, right at the beginning. You say, you write, I had always been loyal to President Donald Trump. He was my president, and he was my friend. Was. Is President Trump still your president, your friend?
What a way to start.
Join me in thanking Carlos and everybody here at Florida International and the Adam Smith Center for bringing us together. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your hospitality, and it's just a joy. Thank you for welcoming the best second lady the United States has ever had to the room right off the bat. And thank you for reading my book. I've done a number of interviews around the country with fairly rare that people have actually read the book.
I have.
It was very intentional. When I sat down to write So Help Me God, I wanted to begin at the beginning. And in that preface, I said that I'd always been loyal to President Donald Trump. He was my president. He was my friend. In 4 short years, we accomplished things that conservatives had only talked about during the course of my lifetime. We made the largest investment in our national defense since the days of Ronald Reagan. We stood with our allies and stood up to our enemies as never before. We stood for freedom in this hemisphere. We stood for freedom of the people of Cuba, and we stood up to the dictator Maduro in Venezuela. And of great interest to the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom, we cut taxes, rolled back regulation, we unleashed American energy, and we achieved energy independence for the first time in 70 years. We stood up for our values as well, defending religious liberty and all the God-given liberties enshrined in our Constitution, and in an administration that saw the appointment of 3 of the justices on the Supreme Court of the United States who overturned Roe versus Wade and gave America a new beginning for life. And it was, in every real sense, it was a tribute to the president's leadership, a tribute to conservative principles. But as I try and recount, and so help me God, during the course of our administration, it was my great privilege to work closely with the president to bring all of those things about, and we did. And up until the time our nation endured the worst pandemic in 100 years, we had achieved extraordinary things for the American people. Now, obviously, the administration did not end well, and I write about that candidly in this book. But I think, as you'll read in the final pages of the book, the president and I actually parted amicably at the close of the administration. In the months that followed, we spoke from time to time, but when the president returned to some of the rhetoric that he was using before that fateful day in January of 2021, I just decided it would be best if we went our separate ways, and we have. I don't know if President Trump and I will ever agree on my responsibilities under the Constitution on January 6th. But I will always be proud of the record of the Trump-Pence administration, and I'm never going to stop fighting for the accomplishments that we gave to the American people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, before I ask you a few questions about the book, your name has been in the news lately. And I know you're going to speak to the press right after this, and I'm going to address this issue, but is there anything you'd like to say about what has been reported recently?
Well, thank you, Carlos. It's actually been a very humbling week for us. But I know we did the right thing. Look, the proper handling of classified information is very important to the national interest. Throughout my career in the Congress and as your vice president, we always sought to take great care in the handling of the nation's secrets. At the close of our administration, we did a thorough review of all the documents in the possession of the office of the vice president and in the residence of the vice president. And I'm confident that was conducted in a professional manner. But with news in recent weeks of repeated disclosure of classified documents in the personal residence of President Biden, and documents dating back to his service as vice president, I simply thought, out of an abundance of caution, it would be appropriate to review my personal records, kept at our residence in the state of Indiana. And we initiated that process. Along the way, we determined that there was a small number of documents marked classified or sensitive interspersed in my personal papers. Upon making that discovery, we secured those documents immediately. We alerted the National Archives, we turned them over to the FBI, and soon thereafter communicated to the Congress. Now, while I was not aware that those classified documents were in our personal residence, let me be clear. Those classified documents should not have been in my personal residence. Mistakes were made. And I take full responsibility. And I've directed my counsel to work with the National Archives, with the Department of Justice, and with the Congress to fully cooperate in any investigation. Our national security depends on the proper handling of classified and sensitive materials. And I know that when errors are made, it's important that they be resolved swiftly and disclosed. And my only hope is that as the American people look at our conduct in this matter, that they see that we acted above politics and put the national interest first. And I pledge to each and every one of you and to the American people that we will continue to do so. So help me God.
Thank you, sir. So help me God, title of your book. You begin each chapter of your book with a quote from Scripture. Faith is very important to you. Can you tell us how faith has helped to shape not only your time in public service, but how you approach making decisions and how you take into account your faith as a public servant?
Well, Carlos, thank you. Thank you for that very thoughtful question. And the title of the book really does come from two places. The oath of office that Congresswoman Ross Layton and I took when we were in the Congress, that I took when I was vice president, ends with a prayer. So help me God. And each of us understand in that moment, if we reflect on it, that we're making a promise not just to the American people, but to Almighty God. And every day of my 20 years of public service, I sought to live up to that. And so in writing a book that encompassed my public career in the Congress and as governor and as vice president, I thought it was fitting to highlight that. But it went deeper, as you suggest, Carlos, because for me, my faith in my family is what defines me. You know, I grew up in a wonderful big Irish Catholic family. My mother was first generation Irish American. My grandfather, after whom I was named, immigrated to this country from Ireland. My mother, 90 years young as we speak, is a precocious redhead, unstoppable. My dad was a combat veteran in the Korean War. And I was raised in a church family. You know, it was grace before dinner. It was church on Sunday morning. Religion was an important part of our family's life. But as I came of age and was the age of some of the young people here, I lost interest in religion. I'd achieved a little bit of success in my social life and academic life, and I thought that I didn't need God. But along the way, as I recount in the pages of this book, I began to meet some young people that talked to me about having a personal relationship with God. They spoke to me about, not about denominations, but they spoke to me about just being Christians. And I began to talk to them about the Bible, about what it had to say. And I found myself in the spring of 1978 at a Christian music festival in the early days of contemporary Christian music. A little place called Wilmore, Kentucky. And it It was on a rainy hillside that I recount in the book on a Saturday night in the spring of that year that it was as though I heard the words for the first time, that God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whoever might believe in him might not perish but have everlasting life. And I stood up that day and I walked down, not out of a sense of just agreement with the truth of it, but because my heart was broken with gratitude for what had been done for me on the cross. And I walked down, I found a young pastor, and I prayed the prayer to accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. And it's been the most important decision of my life. And every day since, I've sought to live that out. But as you'll read in the pages of the book, it's been an imperfect journey. My early days in politics, I didn't square what I professed in my faith to the way that I dealt with people in the public square. But we've sought to grow and to learn in that regard. The second most important decision I ever made in my life is when I followed a beautiful brunette out the back of a church on the north side of Indianapolis. We were engaged a short while later. We were married a short while after that. And 37 years later, she is the greatest blessing of my life. So, you're right. So this book, in a very real sense, is about public life, but it's just as much about our faith in God and the foundation of faith in our marriage and our family, and the ways that that's nurtured us. I didn't intend to open every chapter of So Help Me God with a Bible verse, but after I was about halfway done with the book, I noticed there was always some verse I was throwing in because it meant things to us during that time in our life. And so I hope it's a blessing to people, and I hope they see in these two ordinary Christians maybe some encouragement in their own faith.
So you mentioned the beautiful brunette. The title of the third chapter is The Beautiful Brunette with the Guitar.
With the guitar.
And the beautiful brunette is here without the guitar. But I want to ask you about Mrs. Pence, because I know she's incredibly important to you, and she's been a big factor in your time as a public servant. And I know there are probably thousands of anecdotes, but is there one anecdote, just one, where her support, her counsel really made the difference?
Carlos, there is not just one. You know, to know me, you have to know Karen. Because everything I've done in my life, we've done. It was my wife that gave me the courage and the inspiration to try for Congress after I'd lost the first 2 times. It was my wife that's moved our family 18 times, responding to a call of service in the country and never question it. But she is in herself an inspiring person. When I met her, she was a pilot, an elementary school teacher. She had a motorcycle and a firearm. It was love at first sight. And I mean to tell you, our son, who's a captain in the Marine Corps, calls his mom Mama Platoon Sergeant. She's kept our family together through thick and thin. And as you can read all the way through the final pages, even on that momentous day in January of 2021, she was there at the Capitol with me, along with our daughter Charlotte. I was determined to stay at my post that day to finish our work in the peaceful transfer of power. The Secret Service, though, had told Karen that they could take her and our daughter Charlotte back to the residence while we worked through the tumultuous events of that day, but she wouldn't leave. She is quite simply the most courageous and faithful person I have ever known. And I want to thank you for your service to the nation, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Vice President, let me ask you about your time as governor. I think governors across the country are doing exciting things. We're blessed in the state of Florida to have a great governor, Governor DeSantis, a great lieutenant governor, who's an alum of FIU, by the way. And when you were governor, you implemented a number of policies that were really a model for the nation. I can think of one, your vocational education program that served as a model for the Trump-Pence apprenticeship. Why are we not paying more attention to what the governors are doing? Why are we not following the lead of so many great governors that could be a model for what we should be doing policy-wise at the federal level?
Well, Carlos, first I want to commend the Adam Smith Center for your focus. You know, Ronald Reagan said in his first inaugural address, it's important to remember that the states created the federal government. The federal government didn't create the states. The states have always been laboratories of democracy and reform. And in Republican-led states, that's never been more true. I mean, whether it be in areas of education, educational choice, whether it be in vocational education, whether it be in defending liberties, in one state after another, whether it be here in Florida or in Georgia or in Texas or in Iowa, Republican governors are proving that freedom works. And I truly do believe it's our Republican governors that are demonstrating each and every day the way back from the failed policies of the Biden-Harris administration. So I couldn't agree with you more. And I would say my time in Indiana as governor, I discovered along the way that back when I was in high school, in a small town where there were two large manufacturing companies, vocational education was as big a part of our local high school as college preparatory education. There's really no difference. I always tell people, when I grew up in Columbus, Indiana, we all parked in the same parking lot. We walked through the same two doors. Some people turned to go to study AP English. Other people turned and went down to industrial arts. We all ate in the same cafeteria. We all cheered the same basketball team on Friday night and walked across the stage on graduation day. Some of my best friends to this day are people that went on to great careers at manufacturing companies in my hometown. But somewhere along the way, Carlos, what I learned was that we lost touch with the connection in high school for vocational education. We still got it, but it mostly has made its way into community colleges, right? But I stood for the principle, and governors around the country are doing this as well, that I think we ought to make vocational education a priority in every high school in America again, because all honest work is honorable. And what we ought to do is have high school education that allows our young people to discover your God-given abilities, discover your passion. I mean, I'm all about, when I was growing up, I lost count of the number of times my late father used to say, "You're going to college." And all my three brothers and two sisters, we all graduated from college. But the truth of the matter is there are tremendous opportunities in American industry today with an industry certification, with additional training and vocational training that will create tremendous opportunity for income and quality of life. So I really do believe that that's the kind of innovation that happens when you empower governors. And I write a fair amount about lots of lessons learned and progress that we made. But on the education front, I will tell you here in Florida, for several governors in a row now, I want to commend the people of Florida for supporting the principle that parents ought to be able to choose where their children go to school, regardless of their income or area code, whether that's public, private, parochial, or homeschool. And Indiana's been a leader, and so has Florida.
Because we're in Miami, I have to ask you about foreign policy, especially foreign policy towards Latin America, which is difficult being in front of two foreign policy leaders in this nation, but I'll try. We're blessed at the center to have the opportunity to interact with a lot of foreign leaders, former presidents, sitting presidents who come in, and the ones from Latin America all unanimously say the same thing, that the U.S. has ignored Latin America for far too long. What should the U.S. do to change that and to make sure that we pay more attention to our allies in the hemisphere?
On our first trip to South America, standing at a podium in Colombia, I simply said, the United States must rededicate ourselves to the principle that this is the hemisphere of freedom. And we must stand for freedom, whether it be in Central America or South America, and stand with men and women who champion freedom and the rule of law all across this hemisphere. It's not a new thought. President Monroe came up with the idea that we would have a doctrine that here in the Americas, here in the New World, we would keep the old world out and we would advance the principles of freedom, but we need to get back to it. Under our administration, I must tell you, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that after capitulation under the Obama administration toward the dictators in Cuba, under our administration, we stood strong for freedom for the Cuban people, and every single day, as it was in Eliana Ross Leighton's life, it was Que Viva Cuba Libre in the Trump-Pence administration. So we undid the capitulation under the Obama administration, but also we stood strong against the dictator Maduro in Venezuela. I must tell you, one of the most poignant moments of our public service was when Karen and I traveled to Colombia on one of our trips to South America, and literally met hundreds of refugees that were fleeing from the tyranny and deprivation taking place in Venezuela. And I know there are heroic people in the room who've lived that. It was our administration that was the first, made sure that America was the first country on earth to recognize Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela, and more than 50 countries followed us in the days that came ahead. So you can imagine how disappointed I am sitting here today that in the 2 years since we left office, the Biden administration has returned to a policy of appeasement. With regard to Venezuela, the easing of sanctions, the authorizing an American oil company to begin pumping oil again from Venezuela. And now we see that the United States, just a few weeks ago, withdrew our support for Juan Guaido as opposition support for the interim governor collapsed. Men and women, I believe that weakness arouses evil, but peace comes through strength. And wherever the Lord leads our little family in the days ahead, I want to promise you that we are going to stand for freedom for the American people and all across the Americas, because this must be the hemisphere of freedom.
So, speaking of freedom, our center, the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom, tries to promote exactly that: economic freedom, individual freedom. And what we're seeing around the country is that across colleges and universities, you say socialism or communism, and a lot of young people think it's exotic, it's romantic. But you say capitalism, and it's almost like a bad word. And so how do we change that? How do we change the narrative so that young people realize that democracy is not perfect, capitalism is not perfect, far from it, but they're the best systems we have to organize our political and our economic world? How do we change that narrative so that we have hope for those who love freedom and democracy around the world?
Well, first, we support the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom.
There we go.
We've got to tell freedom's story. I mean, I know in classrooms around America, we haven't been doing that as much lately as we have before. The truth of the matter is that free market economics, private property, the rule of law, constitutional government, the protection of individual liberties and rights has created the freest and most prosperous nation in the history of the world. It was not socialism that created this nation's prosperity or strength. And the truth of the matter is that a careful review of socialism and its genesis, communism, tells the truth of the failed nature of those policies. Human freedom works. And I think it's absolutely essential that we take that case, particularly to the rising generation, to understand that that we must reject the ideology of centralized control. Now, let me say, I'm very confident this generation will. You know, you will never convince me, and we've got three kids in your generation. One's a captain in the Marine Corps. One writes for the Daily Wire, Charlotte Pence Bond. And one's a Yale Law graduate. And I must tell you, I know a little bit about your generation. You know, when I was growing up, if you heard a song on the radio, you went to a record store. And you hope they had the record in. Now you people just pull out your phone and download the song the moment you hear it. You know, when I was growing up, if you wanted to go buy something, you went to a store. Or maybe you ordered it on a catalog. You've got the world at your fingertips. You will never convince me that this rising generation is going to put up with command and control from big government. This is a freedom generation. And just understand that the pathway to freedom, the pathway to individual liberties is free market economics and capitalism. Adam Smith was right. And go tell the other friends in your generation to advocate the same. And we'll get there, I promise you. This is a freedom generation.
We've talked about you, we've talked about policy. If you would allow me, let me ask you a political question.
Gee, look at the time.
You have said that you would support the Republican nominee for the presidency. If that nominee is Donald Trump, would you support him?
Well, there might be somebody I'd prefer to support more.
Well, so on that point, as you know, this is, and the provost can correct me, one of the top 5 universities in the country in terms of size, top 5 largest universities. We are in the largest city in the largest swing state in the nation. Perfect place to make an announcement. Would you like to make an announcement about who you would support? Who that person might be?
Well, listen, I get your inference. You know, back about 10 years ago when Ileana Ros-Lehtinen and I were in Congress together, she was a really big deal. Could you give her another round of applause? Because she's really chairman of the International Relations Committee, one of the great champions of freedom ever to serve in the Congress. But when I started showing up on C-SPAN on a regular basis, I started hearing from some people about maybe that I'd think about running for national office. And but I must tell you, as we reflected on it and prayed about it over a decade ago, as I write in the book, I took time to reflect on what I might bring to that. You know, I'd been a congressman, and we'd built a strong conservative record in the Congress of the United States. But as we reflected on it, and I thought about the extraordinary responsibilities of the presidency, as I write in the book, Carlos, I just didn't feel ready 10 years ago. We went home to Indiana, and I was the chief executive of our state, and led our state at a time of great opportunity and prosperity, but never imagining that I'd have the privilege to serve as vice president of the United States. I'm grateful to God and to the people of this country and the people of my state for the opportunities that we've had. And I will tell you that we are giving prayerful consideration to what might be next for us, reflecting on the experiences that we've had, but just as much reflecting on the challenges that we face in this country today. As I write at the end of my book, my faith in the American people is boundless, and I know our best days are ahead. But we've got to have a government as good as our people. And the truth is, it's been dismaying to me over the last 2 years to see much of what we accomplished in the Trump-Pence administration dismantled almost one brick at a time. I mean, we essentially ended illegal immigration and asylum abuse at our southern border. We secured our southern border, and now it's the worst crisis at our southern border in history. We had an economy that was ready to rebound after suffering through the worst pandemic in 100 years, but through trillions of dollars in spending, we've seen this administration ignite the worst inflation in 40 years. A war on energy after we achieved energy independence resulted in record gasoline prices across the country, with America going hand in hand to dictators in our own hemisphere instead of developing our own natural resources. And all along the way, what seems to be a steady assault on our liberties and our values. And so for us, in our family, we're going to reflect very carefully on the opportunities that we've had to serve, but we're going to reflect just as deeply on the challenges our country faces. And I'm going to continue to travel all across this country. I'm going to continue to listen and to reflect. And I promise to keep you posted, Carlos.
So a follow-up.
I promise all of you, I'm never going to stop fighting for the values that have always made this country great. So help me God.
So as a follow-up to that promise, would you commit, after you make the decision, to come back to us and share with you your plans?
That's a promise.
Thank you. I'll do one more question, and then we're going to open it up to students. Public service is incredibly important for me. Let me just mention chapter 21 of your book. You mentioned something really, really important throughout the book. But the title of 21 is Be Informed, Be Prepared, Be of Service. I had the privilege of taking a class when I was studying public policy. The class was called To Be a Politician, and the professor was Phil Sharp, congressman from Indiana. You ran against him. Didn't go so well the first time around. Second time around either, but you got there. The class was called, as I said, To Be a Politician. It's really difficult to be a politician nowadays with this environment of polarization and name-calling. We have a lot of young people here in the audience, and I'm sure many more watching online, who I'm sure would like to enter public service, who want to be dedicated public servants, but see on television, in their computers, how the sausage is made, and are turned off by the divisiveness. They're turned off by the scandals and the corruption and all the negativity they see. What do you tell them? What do you tell those students who want to be public servants but are afraid to take that step because of how hard it is and how negative it has become nowadays?
We need you. We need men and women of principle to step forward, and I encourage you to do it boldly. My best advice to every young person about politics is remember, the first rule for success in life is showing up. I'll never forget, and I write about it in the book, when I moved to Indianapolis to go to law school, I had actually, true confession, I'd been a Democrat in the early days of my political activism. I was kind of the Youth Democrat Party coordinator in Bartholomew County, Indiana, back in 1975. It's kind of a community organizer, if the truth be told. But when I heard the voice of Ronald Reagan, I started to hear the values that my immigrant grandfather, that my father and mother had raised me to believe in. Started to reflect on my values that had come to the fore in my life and my faith. And I joined the Reagan Revolution and never looked back. But when I moved to Indianapolis, and this is where showing up shows up in my story, I walked into the Marion County Republican headquarters, and there was this county chairman, a rather large man, sitting behind a large desk. And I'd asked to have a meeting with the chairman of the county. And he took the meeting. And I walked in and looked at him and I said, "Mr. Chairman, I'm here to join the Republican Party." And he looked up at me and said, "Well, it's not really something you join." He said, "But we're glad to have you." And I went to work. I was a precinct committeeman. Karen and I were knocking on doors and running elections in our local neighborhood. And it was all along the way of just showing up, just helping. I will tell you, young people, this is, you step forward to serve your country, you bring integrity and principle to that. As the old saying goes, keep your arms and legs in the ride at all times, because you never know where it's going to take you. As long as you keep faith, the American people are looking for people like you. Keep faith in the ideals of this country. Keep faith in your own abilities. And if you've got that dream in your heart, I'll say with conviction, keep faith in the one that put that dream in your heart, that he'll honor it. He'll open doors and step forward for America, because the best days of the greatest nation on earth are yet to come, but it's all in your hands.
Thank you, sir. So I think we have time for a couple of questions, and so I'm going to ask that the students ask the questions. And before we do that, as you get your questions ready, so start thinking of your questions, I'm going to ask something that's really difficult to ask of a member of Congress or a former member of Congress, to say remarks in 30 seconds or less. But I can't pass the opportunity to have Congresswoman Ross Layton say something about the Vice President, because you served with him for 12 years.
Away from you, Carlos. Well, Dexter and I, our best story about the Pence family is a wonderful afternoon where we were able to take them boating in our boat in Biscayne Bay. Forget about this principled leader stuff. He is just a fun guy, and people don't know that about Mike Pence, but he really is a principled leader. He was the chairman of our Republican conference, and it's pretty difficult to rally those cats, right? It's like herding cats, but we did it. We followed Mike Pence's leadership because he is a principled leader. So I loved working alongside Mike Pence when he was in his 12 years in the House, and then as senator and as vice president. And it is a real joy for Dexter and I to say that we are friends of Mike and Karen Pence. Thank you so much for everything that you've done for our country. And you're right, the best years are ahead. Carlos, muchas gracias, felicidades.
Thank you, thank you. You've never taken me boating. I'm gonna feel, I feel left out. All right, student questions. Right here. There we go.
Thank you so much, Carlos. First of all, Mr. Vice President, thank you for your time. My name is Elias Castilla. I'm a student here at FIU.
Hi, Elias.
And I never thought I would be in front of a former vice president having a conversation. And thanks to the Adam Smith Center, it's not only happened once, but actually twice, with Vice President Francisco Santos of Colombia. Sorry, got my words messed up. The country where I was born, and now with you. In America, our nation, I've turned my dreams into a reality, but many feel that it is impossible nowadays. Do you think the American dream is still alive?
Thank you.
The American dream is alive and well. And I see it every day all across this country. But the truth of the matter is that we have leadership in Washington, D.C., one of whom I hope soon is a former vice president as well.
That's kind of an announcement.
That are really, that are piling taxes and more regulations and advancing policies. The Biden-Harris administration is advancing policies in this war on energy that is contributing to inflation, not just gasoline prices. Remember, virtually everything that we buy in this country, that from whether it's groceries or things at the store, move on 18 wheels. I mean, and those costs go into those small businesses, people that are starting up and starting to pursue their dream are up against it. But I just want to encourage you, if the Trump-Pence administration stands for any truth, it's how quickly things come back with the right policies and the right leadership in our nation's capital. I mean, it really is remarkable to think about. under our administration, by cutting taxes, rolling back regulation, unleashing American energy, and pursuing trade that was both free and fair, 7 million good-paying jobs, wages rising at their fastest pace in history, the lowest unemployment ever recorded for African Americans, lowest unemployment ever recorded for Hispanic Americans, and all of that is a testament to the energy that exists in the American people when you get government out of the way. And so I just would encourage you. The American dream has got some headwinds today. It's still alive. But I'll tell you what, if once we elect leadership in Washington, D.C. that's going to partner with the American dream, sky's the limit.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and I thought we were going to have a lot of microphones, but it looks like it's far away. Young lady? Yeah, you can hold. Just yell it out. Just yell it out. So far to get you the microphone.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Vice President. My name is Nasil. I am from Venezuela. First-time student here. My question is, what would your approach be to tackle the effects of the recently frontier approach towards Maduro by the Biden administration? And what message of hope would you send for all the Venezuelans that may think that the U.S. is not there for them anymore?
Thank you.
Well, first off, thank you for speaking up for your native country. I mean, it's important to remember what you would know, maybe you were too young to remember it. But Venezuela was not long ago one of the most prosperous nations in this hemisphere. Incredible people, a great spirit in that country, incredible resources available. And yet, because of the advent of socialism in that country and dictatorship and tyranny, we've literally seen one of the most prosperous nations in our hemisphere collapse into a failed state. And I think our administration spoke truth on the world stage about that. I traveled to international conferences, the Lima Conference, and was called out by representatives of Cuba that were there carrying water for Venezuela. But the most important thing I think we can do is call on the administration in this country to stand down on their policy of appeasement, whether it be with Venezuela, whether it be Cuba, whether it be Iran. Appeasement has never worked in history. We need to stand strong for freedom. And freedom will be restored. I believe it with all of my heart. The day will come that freedom is restored in Venezuela. And I believe the day will come when Libertad rules the land in Cuba as well. So help us God.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. As somebody who humbly served in the Trump-Pence administration for 4 years, I'm grateful for your leadership, for your service, and I hope you can come back after perhaps an announcement one of these days. But thank you for being with us, and thank you for your generous time.
Join me in thanking Carlos in the center.